She woke slowly, wrapped in warmth she did not remember finding. His arm was heavy across her waist, his breath soft against her neck. When she tried to move, he pulled her closer and said, "You feel so warm, Michelle." And right there, 3 years of restraint ended with those 5 words. Hello, beautiful Pride family. Welcome back to another beautiful story. Your unwavering support means the world to me, and I'm committed to bringing you even more heartwarming stories as I continue to grow and evolve every day. If you're joining us for the first time today, please drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to officially become part of our Pride family. Now, let's get into today's story. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Michelle stepped into the 72nd floor of Rivers Industries like she did every morning at exactly 6:45. 15 minutes before the first executive would arrive, 45 minutes before the man himself walked through those glass doors with the weight of $1 billion empire on his shoulders. She liked it this way. The silence, the empty halls that smelled of fresh coffee and possibility. These stolen minutes before the chaos belonged to her, and she guarded them jealously. Her heels clicked against the polished marble as she made her way to the corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan like it was a kingdom waiting to be conquered. She flicked on the lights, adjusted the temperature to exactly 68 degrees, and set a fresh stack of documents on the desk. 3 years. 3 years of learning his coffee order, his moods, his tells. 3 years of watching him destroy lesser men in boardrooms while she took notes in perfect shorthand. 3 years of being the best damn executive assistant this company had ever seen because she could not afford to be anything less. The coffee machine hummed to life as she programmed his first cup, black, no sugar, brewed at exactly 175 degrees. He had never told her this preference. She had simply observed, catalogued, perfected. By 7:15, the floor began to fill with the usual parade of grey suits and expensive watches. Account managers, junior executives, the occasional board member, making an early appearance to remind everyone of their importance. They nodded at Michelle as they passed, some with genuine respect, others with barely concealed resentment. She had learned to tell the difference years ago, and she had learned not to care. The glass doors finally swung open. Noel Rivers walked in like winter itself had decided to take human form. Tall, angular, carved from ice and old money. His blue eyes swept the floor with the precision of a man who noticed everything and trusted nothing. His charcoal suit fit him like a second skin, and his dark hair was pushed back from a face that magazines loved to photograph and competitors loved to hate. He did not smile. He never smiled, at least not in any way that reached his eyes. Michelle was already standing beside his office door with his coffee in hand. He took it without breaking stride, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Cold. His hands were always cold. "The Henderson contracts are on your desk," she said, falling into step beside him. "Legal flag 2 clauses in section 14. I highlighted them in yellow. And the board meeting?" "Pushed to 10. Morrison had a conflict, but I suspect he is avoiding being interrogated." Something flickered in Noel's expression. Amusement, perhaps, though it was gone before she could name it. "You suspect." "I know, but I am being diplomatic." He stopped at his desk, setting down the coffee as he scanned the stack of documents she had prepared. For a moment, he was silent, and Michelle felt that familiar tension that always accompanied these quiet pauses. 3 years, and she still could not read him completely. It was maddening. It was, if she was being honest with herself, part of why she stayed. "The Whitmore acquisition," he said finally. "Where are we?" Stalled. "Their CFO is playing hardball on the valuation. I have a call scheduled with their assistant for this afternoon to feel out their flexibility." Noel looked up at her then, really looked, and Michelle felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Those blue eyes, sharp as broken glass, studied her face with an intensity that made her want to fidget. She did not fidget. She had trained herself out of that particular weakness during her first week on the job. You scheduled a call with their assistant. Information flows through the gatekeepers, Mr. Rivers. You taught me that. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Closer than he gave anyone else. I will need you in the boardroom at 10, he said, turning back to his documents. Morrison is going to make a move. I want your eyes on the room. Of course. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Michelle. Her name on his lips. It was rare that he used it, preferring the professional distance of Miss Ward. When he did say it, something in his tone shifted, softened at the edges like ice beginning to thaw. Yes? He did not look up from his papers. The coffee is perfect, as always. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same cool detachment he brought to merger negotiations. But Michelle felt it warm something in her chest anyway, a small glow that she quickly extinguished. I will have your lunch ordered by noon, she said, and closed the door behind her. The boardroom at Rivers Industries was designed to intimidate. A massive table of polished mahogany stretched across the length of the room, surrounded by leather chairs. The walls were lined with portraits of previous CEOs, all of them white, all of them men, all of them staring down at the proceedings with expressions of dignified disapproval. Michelle sat in her usual position, slightly behind Noel and to his left, her tablet ready to take notes. She had perfected the art of being present without being noticed, of observing without being observed. It was a survival skill in a room like this, where she was often the only woman and always the only black face among a sea of pale executives. Morrison made his move. A subtle challenge to the quarterly projections, framed as a concern but designed to undermine. Michelle watched it unfold with professional detachment, noting the slight flush on Morrison's neck, the way his allies on the board shifted in their seats. Noel let him talk. He had a gift for silence, for letting people dig their own graves before burying them in it. When Morrison finally wound down, breathless with his own importance, Noel simply leaned forward and began to dismantle his argument piece by piece. It was, Michelle thought, like watching a surgeon operate. Precise, bloodless, utterly ruthless. By the time he finished, Morrison looked like a man who had wandered into a gunfight armed with a butter knife. The projections stand, Noel concluded, his voice flat. Unless anyone else has concerns they would like to voice. Silence. The kind of silence that filled a room when everyone present remembered exactly who owned the company and exactly what happened to people who forgot. Noel's gaze swept the table, and for a moment it landed on Michelle. A brief glance, barely a second, but she felt it like a question. Did I handle that correctly? Is this what you expected? She gave the smallest nod, invisible to anyone who was not looking for it. Something in his expression shifted. Satisfaction, perhaps, or something deeper, more personal. His eyes lingered on her face for a heartbeat too long, dropping briefly, almost imperceptibly, to her mouth, before snapping back to the board members with that familiar, cold professionalism. Michelle's heart stuttered in her chest. She made a note on her tablet that she did not need to make, just to give her hands something to do. After the meeting, she followed him back to his office, maintaining the precise 3 feet of distance she always kept. Professional, appropriate, safe. That was efficient, she said, once the door was closed behind them. Morrison is predictable. He loosened his tie, a rare gesture of relaxation that Michelle tried not to notice. He will try again next quarter. Then we will be ready again next quarter. Noel turned to look at her, and there it was again, that intensity in his gaze that made her feel like she was standing under a spotlight. We, he repeated. I assumed, that is, I meant the company. You said we. Michelle held his gaze, refusing to back down even as heat crept up her neck. Is that a problem, Mr. Rivers? For a long moment, he did not answer. The silence stretched between them like a wire-pulled taut, humming with something she did not want to name. Then he turned away, reaching for the documents on his desk. No, he said quietly. "It is not a problem." The rest of the morning passed in the usual blur of phone calls, schedule adjustments, and the constant management of a company that never seemed to sleep. Michelle handled it all with her customary efficiency, but some part of her mind kept circling back to that moment in the boardroom. The way his eyes had lingered. The soft way he had repeated her word. "We." It meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. She could not afford for it to mean anything. At noon, she delivered his lunch to his desk, a grilled chicken salad with exactly 4 ounces of dressing on the side. He ate while reviewing contracts, barely looking up, but when she turned to leave, he spoke again. "The Swiss acquisition." Michelle paused. "The Muller Group deal? It is happening. The board approved the trip this morning." Something cold settled in her stomach. Switzerland. A 14-hour flight, at least 3 days on the ground, possibly more. Close quarters. Extended proximity. Everything she had carefully avoided for 3 years. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow evening. I need you there for the negotiations." Of course he did. He needed her everywhere, for everything, and she had made herself indispensable because that was the only way to survive in this world. But Switzerland. "Tomorrow, I will make the arrangements," she said. The company jet, 2 suites at the Grand Palace Hotel in Zurich, and Michelle, she met his eyes. "Pack warm. I'm told the weather is unpredictable this time of year." There was something in his voice that she could not quite identify. Concern, perhaps, or anticipation, or something else entirely that she was too afraid to examine closely. "Of course, Mr. Rivers," she said, and left before he could see the flush spreading across her cheeks. The next evening found Michelle boarding the Rivers Industries private jet with a carefully packed carry-on and a carefully constructed sense of calm. The plane was obscenely luxurious, all cream leather and polished wood, with a bar and a bedroom in the back that she refused to think about. Noel was already seated when she arrived, his jacket removed and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows in a rare display of informality. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, and he looked, for just a moment, almost human. "Miss Ward," he said, nodding toward the seat across from him. "Please." She settled into the buttery leather, her tablet already in hand. "I confirmed the meeting with Mueller's team for Thursday morning. I also arranged a backup dinner reservation in case the initial negotiations run long. Always 3 steps ahead. That is what you pay me for." The jet engines hummed to life, and Michelle felt the familiar pressure of takeoff push her back into her seat. She busied herself with emails, determined to maintain the professional distance that had served her so well for 3 years. But she could feel his eyes on her, that steady blue gaze that always seemed to see too much. An hour into the flight, the turbulence started. It came without warning, a sudden lurch that sent papers flying and Michelle's heart into her throat. The plane shuddered and dropped, then steadied, then dropped again. Across from her, Noel gripped the armrest with white-knuckled fingers, his face tight with something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Rivers?" She kept her voice calm, steady. "Are you all right?" "Fine." The word was clipped, controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the rapid rise and fall of his chest. The plane lurched again, and his scotch glass slid across the table. Michelle caught it without thinking, her fingers closing around the crystal just before it tipped. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Vulnerable, almost grateful. "You do not like flying," she said. It was not a question. "I do not like not being in control." Of course. Noel Rivers, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent billion-dollar deals to his will, undone by a little turbulence. It should have been satisfying to see this crack in his armor. Instead, Michelle felt something else entirely, something soft and dangerous that she immediately tried to suppress. She stood, bracing herself against the swaying of the plane, and crossed to the bar. Her movements were practiced, automatic. Scotch, 2 fingers, no ice. She poured it the way he liked it and brought it to him, settling into the seat beside him instead of across. "Here," she said, pressing the glass into his hand. "Focus on something else." His fingers closed around the crystal, and in doing so, closed around hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. His skin was cold, always so cold, but something warm flickered in his eyes as he looked at her. "How do you always know?" he asked quietly. "Know what? What I need. Before I need it." The plane shuddered again, but Michelle barely noticed. She was too focused on the weight of his gaze, the pressure of his fingers against hers, the sudden awareness that they were completely alone at 30,000 feet with nothing but clouds below and stars above. "It is my job," she said finally. "Is it?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Michelle's breath caught in her chest. She should pull her hand away. She should return to her seat. She should remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. The turbulence passed eventually, smoothing into the steady hum of a plane at cruising altitude. But Michelle did not move, and Noel did not release her hand. They sat in silence, watching the darkness outside the windows, and something shifted between them. Something that had been building for 3 years, held back by professionalism and propriety, and the simple, desperate need to pretend it did not exist. "You should get some sleep," he said finally. His voice was rough, lower than usual. "Tomorrow will be long. So should you. I do not sleep well on planes. Then I will stay awake with you." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. She saw him then, not the Ice King, not the billionaire CEO, but the man underneath. Lonely, guarded, hungry for something he would not let himself take. "You do not have to do that, Michelle." Her name again, soft on his lips, like a secret. "I know," she said. "I want to." They talked through the night. Not about work, not about the acquisition or the board or the endless negotiations that consumed their days. They talked about nothing and everything, about the books she loved and the music he secretly listened to when no one was watching. She learned that he played piano, badly, and that he had a sister he had not spoken to in 7 years. He learned that she had put herself through college on scholarships and sheer stubbornness, and that she sometimes dreamed of leaving New York for somewhere with trees and quiet. Somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn, his hand found hers again. This time, it was warm. The jet touched down in Zurich as the first pale light of morning crept across the Alps. Michelle had dozed off at some point, her head tilted against the seat, and when she woke, she found a blanket draped over her that she had not put there. Noel was at the window, watching the snow-capped mountains emerge from the clouds, his profile sharp against the grey light. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. He turned, and something in his expression made her heart skip. Softness. That terrifying softness that he never let anyone see. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected." She sat up, pushing the blanket aside. "How long was I out?" 3 hours. I did not want to wake you. 3 hours of watching her sleep. 3 hours of sitting in silence while she rested. Michelle did not know what to do with that information, so she filed it away with all the other things she was trying not to think about. The drive to the hotel took them through winding mountain roads that grew increasingly white with snow. The weather reports had mentioned a potential storm, but nothing like this. By the time they reached the Grand Palace, the wind was howling, and visibility had dropped to nearly zero. The hotel lobby was chaos. Crowds of people clustered around the front desk, their voices raised in a dozen different languages. A tech conference, Michelle learned from a harried bellman, had been extended due to the weather. Every hotel in the city was overbooked. She pushed her way to the front desk, her professional smile firmly in place. "Michelle Ward, checking in for Rivers Industries. We have 2 suites reserved." The concierge's face fell. "Miss Ward, I am so terribly sorry. With the conference and the weather, we have had to consolidate reservations. I'm afraid we only have 1 suite available." Michelle felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. That is not acceptable. We specifically reserved 2 rooms. I understand, and I sincerely apologize. The storm, it is unprecedented. We are doing everything we can, but there is simply nothing else available. Not here, not anywhere in the city. 1 room. 1 suite. With Noel Rivers, she felt him step up behind her, his presence a solid wall of warmth against her back. When he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, utterly without inflection. "We will take it." Michelle spun to face him. "Mr. Rivers, I do not think that is. We should try other hotels. Perhaps we could." "Miss Ward." His eyes met hers, and there was something there she could not read. "It is late. There is a blizzard, and we are adults. We will manage." Adults. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them would acknowledge. Michelle wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the reasons why this was a catastrophically bad idea, but she was exhausted and frozen, and the alternative was sleeping in the lobby with 300 tech executives. "Fine," she said. 1 room. The suite was obscenely large, at least large enough that they should have been able to avoid each other entirely. The windows looked out on a world that had turned entirely white, the blizzard raging with a fury that felt almost personal. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting warm shadows across the plush carpets and the massive, impossibly soft-looking bed that dominated the far end of the room. 1 bed. Of course. Of course, there was only 1 bed. Michelle stood in the doorway, her suitcase clutched in her hands like a shield. Behind her, Noel moved past, shedding his coat and tossing it over a chair with the casual ease of a man who was used to rooms like this. "I will take the couch," she said quickly. "No," he said. "Excuse me?" He turned to face her, and in the firelight his features looked different. Softer, almost vulnerable. "You will not sleep on the couch. It is late. We have negotiations in the morning, and you need to rest. Then where will you?" "We will share the bed." He held up a hand before she could protest. "There are approximately 15 pillows on that thing. We will build a wall, a fortress, the Great Wall of Switzerland. You will have your space, and I will have mine, and in the morning we will pretend none of this ever happened. Does that work for you, Miss Ward?" It should not have worked for her. Every professional instinct she had screamed that this was a mistake, that the consequences of this single night could undo everything she had worked for. But there was something in his voice, something careful and guarded, that made her think he was just as terrified as she was. "Fine," she heard herself say. "A pillow fortress." The next hour passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Michelle changed in the bathroom, trading her professional attire for silk pajamas that suddenly felt far too intimate. When she emerged, Noel had stripped down to a simple t-shirt and sleep pants, and she had to look away quickly from the unexpected vulnerability of his bare arms. He was already building the fortress, stacking pillows down the center of the bed with meticulous precision. There was something almost endearing about it. This powerful man who commanded empires, carefully arranging cushions like a child building a blanket fort. "Is this sufficient?" he asked, stepping back to examine his work. "It looks very structural. I am an engineer by training. We take our walls seriously." Was that a joke? From Noel Rivers? Michelle felt a surprised laugh escape her lips, and something in his expression shifted at the sound. He looked at her differently then, like she had given him a gift he did not expect. They climbed into the bed from opposite sides, maintaining the careful distance that the pillows enforced. The sheets were cool and impossibly soft, and the mattress seemed to embrace her like a cloud. Outside, the wind howled and shrieked, but in here, cocooned by warmth and firelight, it felt like they were the last 2 people in the world. Michelle. His voice in the darkness, quiet and close despite the barrier between them. "Yes. Thank you for staying awake with me on the plane. You did not have to do that. I know. Why did you?" She stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance. The honest answer was too dangerous. The safe answer was too dishonest. So she settled for something in between, because you needed someone. And I was there. Silence. Then, softly, no one has ever done that before. Been there? Stayed. The word cracked something open in her chest. She thought of everything she knew about him, every rumor and whisper and tabloid headline. The broken engagement 5 years ago, the business partner who had betrayed him, the parade of beautiful women who never seemed to last more than a few weeks, all that money, all that power, and somehow he was still alone. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Anything. I hate the cold. I grew up in Miami, and I have never gotten used to winter. Every January, I fantasize about quitting everything and moving to a beach somewhere." A soft sound from his side of the pillow wall, almost a laugh. "And yet, here you are, in a Swiss blizzard. Here I am. Why did you take this job, Michelle? You could work anywhere. You are brilliant. You are beautiful. You are." He stopped himself, but not before she heard the words that slipped out. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful. "I took this job because you challenged me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because on my first day, you looked at my resume and told me that you did not care where I went to school or who I knew. You cared whether I could keep up, and I wanted to prove that I could. You have done more than keep up. You have made yourself essential." "Is that why you brought me on this trip?" "Because I am essential?" The silence that followed was different. Charged. Electric. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I brought you because I cannot imagine doing this without you. Any of it. The negotiations, the flights, the endless meetings that make me want to throw myself out a window. A pause. I brought you because I wanted you here. With me." Michelle's heart pounded in her ears. The pillow fortress suddenly felt very flimsy, very inadequate against the force of what was building between them. She should change the subject. She should pretend she did not hear the vulnerability in his voice, the confession buried beneath the words. Instead, she said, "Tell me something else. Something you have never told anyone." Another long silence. Then, "I hate the cold too." She laughed, surprised. "But you are the Ice King. That is literally what people call you." "I know. It is convenient. If everyone thinks you are cold, they stop expecting warmth." His voice softened. "The truth is, I grew up in a house that was always freezing. My father believed it built character. I spent my entire childhood dreaming of somewhere warm. That is horrible. It is the past." But there was something in his voice that suggested it was not entirely past, that some part of him was still that cold little boy dreaming of warmth. "What do you dream of now?" she asked. The fire crackled, the wind screamed, and in the darkness, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Someone to keep me warm." Michelle did not know what to say to that. She did not know what to do with the ache that bloomed in her chest, the desperate urge to tear down the pillow wall and wrap herself around him until neither of them were cold ever again. But she was his assistant. He was her boss. And some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. "We should sleep," she said finally. "Early meeting tomorrow." "Yes." His voice was carefully neutral again, the walls back up. "Good night, Miss Ward. Good night, Mr. Rivers." She closed her eyes and listened to the storm rage outside. But beneath the howling wind, she could hear his breathing, slow and steady, just a few feet away. It took her a long time to fall asleep, and when she finally did, she dreamed of fire and ice, and a man with blue eyes who looked at her like she was the first warm thing he had ever touched. The night deepened around them. At some point, Michelle woke briefly to find that she had rolled closer to the pillow wall, her hand resting against one of the cushions, like she was reaching for something on the other side. She pulled it back, tucked it under her own pillow, and told herself it meant nothing. But in the darkness on the other side of the fortress, she heard him shift, heard his breath catch, and she wondered if he was reaching too. The blizzard continued through the night, burying the world in white. Somewhere in the city below, negotiations were waiting, contracts were unsigned, empires hung in the balance. But here in this room, suspended between the mountain and the sky, none of that seemed to matter. There was only the fire, the wind, and the impossible gravity that pulled them toward each other despite every wall they tried to build. Michelle lay awake and wondered what the morning would bring. She thought about the meeting ahead, the careful professional dance they would have to perform. She thought about the way his voice had sounded when he said he wanted her there, with him. She thought about 3 years of glances and stolen moments, and the electric awareness that sparked between them every time they were in the same room. Something was going to happen. She could feel it building like pressure before a storm, like the moment before lightning struck. 3 years of tension, of restraint, of pretending that what burned between them was nothing more than professional respect. It could not hold forever. Nothing built under that much pressure ever could. But not tonight. Tonight, there was still a wall between them. Tonight, they were still boss and assistant, still playing the roles they had constructed so carefully. Tonight, she could still pretend that her heart did not race when he said her name, that her skin did not tingle where he had touched her hand on the plane. Tomorrow, the negotiations. Tomorrow, the careful professional distance. Tomorrow, the masks would go back on, and they would be who they had always been. But the night was not over yet, and sometimes, in the space between darkness and dawn, walls were not as sturdy as they seemed. Michelle closed her eyes and waited for morning, her fingers still tingling from the memory of his touch. On the other side of the pillow fortress, close enough to hear, too far to reach, Noel lay awake and watched the shadows dance on the ceiling. The fire burned low, the wind howled on, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, something inevitable began to take shape. Michelle woke slowly, consciousness seeping in like honey through water. Something was different. Something was warm. Her body felt heavy with sleep, cocooned in a heat that seemed to radiate from everywhere at once, and for a long, drowsy moment she did not question it. Then she felt the arm. Heavy across her waist, fingers splayed against her stomach, pulling her back against a solid wall of warmth that she would recognize anywhere. The pillow fortress was gone, scattered across the floor like the remnants of a failed negotiation. And Noel Rivers, the Ice King himself, was wrapped around her like she was the only source of heat in the universe. His face was buried in the curve of her neck. She could feel his breath, slow and steady, warming her skin in soft pulses. His chest pressed against her back, rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. And his hand, that cold hand that was always so carefully restrained, was splayed across her belly like he was afraid she might disappear. Michelle's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to move. She needed to extract herself from this situation before he woke up, before they had to acknowledge what had happened in the night. She shifted slightly, trying to slide out from under his arm without disturbing him. His grip tightened. "You feel so warm, Michelle." His voice was rough with sleep, barely above a whisper, but it shot through her like electricity. He was awake. He knew exactly where he was, exactly what he was doing, and he was not letting go. Noel. She meant it to sound firm, professional. It came out breathless. "We should not the meeting. We need to," she stuttered. "The meeting is not for 3 hours. His lips moved against her neck as he spoke, not quite a kiss, but close enough that her entire body erupted in goosebumps. "And I have been lying here for 20 minutes trying to convince myself to let you go." 20 minutes? You talk in your sleep. Did you know that? Heat flooded her cheeks. What did I say? "My name." His arm tightened around her, pulling her impossibly closer. "Just my name. Over and over, like a prayer." She should stop this. Every rational thought in her head screamed that she should stop this right now, extract herself from his arms, rebuild the walls that had crumbled in the night. But his hand was sliding up her stomach, tracing the curve of her ribs through the thin silk of her pajamas, and rational thought was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "This is a mistake," she whispered, but she did not move away. "Probably. I am your assistant. I am aware. If anyone found out, Michelle." He turned her then, gently but inexorably, until she was facing him in the pale morning light. His blue eyes were dark, intense, stripped of every mask she had ever seen him wear. "I have spent 3 years watching you walk into my office every morning and pretending I did not want to do this." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was something precious, something rare, something he had been waiting his entire life to find. "Do you have any idea," he said quietly, "what it has been like? Seeing you every day, wanting you every moment, telling myself that I had no right, that you deserved better than a man made of ice and old wounds." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she trembled. "But you keep looking at me like that, like you see something worth saving, and I am not strong enough to keep pretending anymore. Looking at you like what? Like I am not the monster everyone thinks I am." The words cracked something open in her chest. She thought of every moment over the past 3 years, every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every time she had caught him watching her when he thought she was not looking. She thought of the man on the plane, gripping her hand through the turbulence. The man who built pillow fortresses and admitted he hated the cold. The man who was holding her now like she was the only real thing in his world. "You are not a monster," she said. "You are just lonely." Something shifted in his expression. The last wall fell, and then he kissed her. It was not gentle. 3 years of restraint, of tension, of desperate wanting poured into that kiss like a dam finally breaking. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath, his hands tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer, closer, never close enough. She gasped against his lips, and he swallowed the sound, his tongue sliding against hers in a rhythm that made her entire body arch toward him. "I have wanted this," he breathed between kisses, "since the day you corrected my spreadsheet in red ink. That was my first week." "I know." He kissed her jaw, her neck, the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her whimper. "You walked into my office with your perfect posture and your sharper mind, and you looked at my numbers and told me I was wrong. No one tells me I am wrong." His teeth grazed her earlobe. "I was done for before you finished the sentence." She pulled back just far enough to see his face. "You yelled at me for an hour. I was terrified." His eyes met hers, brutally honest. "You were going to ruin me, and I knew it even then." Michelle did not know who moved first after that. One moment they were tangled in the sheets, and the next she was on her feet, her back pressed against the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window as Noel pinned her there with his body. The blizzard raged on the other side of the glass, white and wild and furious, but she could not feel anything except him. His hand slid down her sides, finding the hem of her silk top and pushing it up, his fingers tracing patterns of fire across her bare skin. The contrast was devastating. The cold glass against her back, and his burning touch against her front, and she heard herself moan in a way that should have been embarrassing but was not. "Look at you," he murmured, pulling back just enough to see her. His eyes traced her body like she was a work of art, something to be studied and worshipped. "Do you have any idea how many meetings I have sat through, imagining this, imagining you? Tell me." "Every single one." He pressed his lips to her collarbone, tasting her skin. "Every boring board meeting, every endless negotiation. I would look at you taking notes in that perfect handwriting and wonder what sounds you would make if I put my mouth here." He kissed the curve of her shoulder. "Or here, the hollow of her throat. Or here, the swell of her breast, just above the edge of her top." Michelle's head fell back against the glass. Noel, I love the way you say my name. His hands found the buttons of her top, undoing them one by one with agonizing slowness. Say it again. Say it again. Noel, again. Noel, please. He groaned against her skin, a sound of pure, desperate need. I will give you everything, Michelle. Anything you want. Just do not stop saying my name. The silk fell away, and then his mouth was on her, hot and demanding, and she stopped thinking entirely. There was only sensation, only his hands and his lips, and the impossible heat of his body against hers. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, her legs wrapping around his waist as he pressed her harder against the glass. Mine, he breathed against her neck. The word was possessive, primal, and it should have frightened her. Instead, it made something deep inside her clench with want. He rewarded her with a kiss that burned, his tongue claiming her mouth as his hands claimed her body. She could feel him against her, hard and wanting, and the thin fabric between them seemed like an insurmountable barrier. I should take you to the bed, he said, his voice ragged. I should do this properly. I should. No. She pulled his face back to hers, her fingers threading through his dark hair. Here. Now. Please. Something snapped in him then. She saw it happen, watched the last shred of his control disintegrate in the blue fire of his eyes. When he moved, it was with a purpose that made her tremble, his hands working at the fabric, separating them with an efficiency that spoke to a desperation he could no longer hide. And then there was nothing between them at all. The first moment of connection stole her breath. He stilled against her, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Look at me, he demanded. Michelle, look at me. She opened her eyes. His face was inches from hers, contorted with pleasure and something deeper, something that looked almost like awe. I need you to know, he said, his voice breaking. You have been everything for 3 years, and I was too much of a coward to tell you. She kissed him, pouring every unspoken feeling into the press of her lips against his. And then he began to move, and she stopped being capable of words entirely. The glass was cold against her back. His body was fire against her front. The storm raged outside, white and wild, while a different storm raged within. She heard herself crying out, heard him answering with her name, over and over, like it was the only word he knew. His hands gripped her hips hard enough to bruise, and she wanted those bruises, wanted to carry the evidence of this moment on her skin. You are so beautiful, he gasped, his rhythm growing more desperate. So perfect. I have dreamed about this, about you, every night for 3 years. But the reality, God, Michelle, the reality is so much better. She was falling, climbing, flying apart in his arms. He held her together and shattered her simultaneously, and when the peak finally crashed over her, she screamed his name loud enough to echo off the mountains. He followed moments later, his body shuddering against hers, her name a broken prayer on his lips. They stayed like that for a long moment, pressed against the glass, the storm raging around them, while a different kind of stillness settled within. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were soft, in a way she had never seen them. He touched her face with trembling fingers, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, looked at her like she had handed him something precious and fragile. Michelle, he whispered. Just that, just her name. But it held entire universes. The morning after arrived like a cold splash of water. Michelle woke for the second time to find the bed empty beside her. The sheets where Noel had been were cold, and when she sat up, she found him fully dressed by the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape with an expression she could not read. The storm cleared enough for the meeting to proceed, he said without turning around. His voice was cool, measured. Professional. The car will be here in 45 minutes. Something cold settled in her stomach. Noel. I had breakfast sent up. There is coffee on the sideboard. I need to review some documents before we leave. He still was not looking at her. This man who had whispered her name like a prayer just hours ago, who had held her like she was the only real thing in his world, was now treating her like what she actually was, his employee. Michelle felt something shrivel inside her. Of course this was how it would go. She had let herself believe, for a few heated hours, that she could be something more than his assistant, that all those pretty words had meant something. But here, in the harsh light of morning, with a multi-million-dollar deal waiting to be closed, she was reminded exactly where she stood. She showered quickly, dressed in her most professional armor, and joined him for a breakfast that felt more like a funeral. He spoke only about the acquisition, about negotiation strategies and potential pitfalls, and his eyes never once warmed when they looked at her. By the time they reached the Mueller Group offices, Michelle had rebuilt every wall she had ever constructed. Higher this time, stronger. Because she had learned the hard way what happened when she let them fall. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Mueller's team came in with impossible demands, moving goalposts that made the entire negotiation feel like an elaborate game designed for them to lose. Noel countered with his characteristic precision, but even his sharpest arguments seemed to slide off their resistance like water off glass. By hour 3, the Rivers Industries board members were on speakerphone, their voices growing increasingly agitated as the deal slipped through their fingers. "This is unacceptable." Morrison's voice crackled through the speaker. "We were assured this acquisition was solid. Who approved the logistics for this meeting? Who failed to anticipate these objections?" Michelle felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The board members on the phone could not see it, but the men around the table could, and she watched them shift in their seats, ready to throw her to the wolves if it would save their own skins. The logistics were impeccable. Noel said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "The issue lies with Mueller's unreasonable 11th-hour demands, which we could not have anticipated, regardless of preparation. Someone needs to take responsibility for this failure," Morrison pressed. "The shareholders are going to want answers. Then give them this answer." Noel stood, and the room seemed to contract around him. "I personally oversaw every aspect of this deal. If there is blame to be assigned, it falls on my shoulders and no one else's." The logistics team, including Miss Ward, executed their responsibilities flawlessly. "This failure, if we are calling it that, is mine and mine alone." Silence. The board members on the phone sputtered, unaccustomed to having their scapegoat snatched away. The Mueller team exchanged glances, and Michelle sat frozen, watching the man who had been cold to her all morning sacrifice his own reputation to protect hers. "We will reconvene tomorrow," Noel continued. "Gentlemen, I suggest you prepare more reasonable terms if you want Rivers Industries to remain at the table. Morrison, I will speak with the shareholders personally. This call is concluded." He disconnected the conference line before anyone could respond. The ride back to the hotel was silent. Michelle stared out the window, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the distant stranger of this morning with the man who had just thrown himself on a grenade to save her. When they reached the lobby, she followed him to the elevator, and as soon as the doors closed, she spoke. "Why did you do that?" He did not pretend to misunderstand. "Because they would have destroyed you. That board, they are looking for any excuse to question your position, your competence, your right to be in that room. I could have defended myself." "I know you could have." He turned to face her, and for the first time since morning, she saw something crack in his facade. "But you should not have to. Not against them. Not ever. And this morning? The cold shoulder, the distance? Was that supposed to protect me too?" He flinched like she had struck him. "I was trying to do the right thing. For you, you do not get to decide what is right for me." "I know." He stepped closer, and she saw the torment in his eyes, the war between what he wanted and what he thought she deserved. "Michelle, I am not a good man. I am cold and selfish, and I will hurt you if you let me get close enough. This morning, I looked at you sleeping, and I thought about all the ways I could ruin your life. Your career, your reputation, everything you have worked for. I am poison to everyone who gets close to me." "That sounds like an excuse." It is not an excuse, it is a warning. He reached for her then, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that contradicted every word he was saying. I am trying to give you the chance to run, to save yourself before I drag you down with me. And if I do not want to run, his breath caught. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the same gesture from this morning, the one that had undone her completely. Then God help us both, he whispered, because I am not strong enough to push you away twice. The kiss that followed was different from the morning, softer, more desperate in its tenderness. He kissed her like she was something he was terrified of breaking, like she was a miracle he did not deserve. I am going to ruin you, he breathed against her lips, and I am going to hate myself for it. But I cannot let you go. The elevator doors opened to an empty hallway, and they broke apart, breathing hard. Michelle felt shattered and whole simultaneously, terrified and exhilarated, standing on the edge of something that could save or destroy them both. Tomorrow, he said, his voice rough. We finish the negotiation, we close the deal, and then we figure out what the hell we are doing. And tonight? His eyes darkened. Tonight, I hold you while you sleep and remind myself that you are real, that this is real, that for once in my miserable life, something good is happening to me. They did not make love that night. They lay tangled together in the massive bed, the pillow fortress forgotten, and talked until dawn began to lighten the sky. He told her about his father, the cold house, the endless pressure to be perfect. She told him about growing up poor, about the scholarships that had been her lifeline, about the constant, exhausting effort of proving herself in rooms that did not want her there. And somewhere in the quiet hours, between confession and comfort, Michelle realized she was falling in love with him. Not the Ice King, not the billionaire, but the man underneath, the one who was so afraid of his own warmth that he had built an empire of cold just to survive. The deal closed the next day. Mueller's team, perhaps sensing the shift in power, came to the table with reasonable terms. The board was mollified. Morrison's coup attempt was delayed, and Rivers Industries secured its most valuable acquisition in a decade. On the flight home, Noel held her hand the entire way. New York City greeted them with its usual chaos, and for a few days they tried to pretend that nothing had changed. Michelle returned to her desk outside his office. Noel returned to his endless meetings. The masks went back on, professional and appropriate, as if Switzerland had never happened. But everything had changed, and everyone knew it. The other executives began to notice the way Noel's eyes followed Michelle across the room. The assistants whispered about the way she emerged from his office, looking flushed and distracted. The energy between them had shifted from professional respect to something electric, something that made the air crackle whenever they were in the same space. It was 3 days after their return when the elevator incident happened. Michelle was working late, finalizing the Swiss acquisition paperwork. The office had emptied hours ago, and she was the only one left on the floor besides the cleaning staff. She gathered her things and headed for the elevator, her mind still tangled in contract clauses and profit margins. The doors opened to reveal Noel inside, his tie loosened and his jacket slung over one arm. He looked exhausted. He looked beautiful. He looked at her like she was water in a desert. "Going down?" she asked, stepping inside. "I was going up, to find you." The doors closed. The elevator began to descend, and then his hand shot out and hit the emergency stop button. "Noel, what are you?" He was on her before she could finish the sentence. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that had been building for 3 days, his hands tangling in her hair as he backed her against the elevator wall. She gasped against his lips and he swallowed the sound, just like before, just like always. 3 days, he growled between kisses. 3 days of watching you at your desk, taking notes, answering phones, being so goddamn professional. Do you have any idea what you do to me? We are at work. The office is empty. Someone could. No one will. He kissed her neck, her jaw, the corner of her mouth. I have been sitting in meetings all day, trying to concentrate while all I can think about is the way you taste. The sounds you make. The way you said my name when I was inside you. Michelle's knees went weak. She gripped his shoulders to stay upright, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt, the barely restrained power of his body against hers. You are insane, she whispered. For you? Absolutely. His hand slid down her sides, found the hem of her skirt, began to inch it upward. I have a dinner meeting in 20 minutes that I am going to be late for. But I needed to touch you, just for a moment, just to remind myself that Switzerland was not a dream. And if someone notices you are late, then they will wait. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I built this company from nothing. I control billions of dollars. I make grown men cry in boardrooms. But you, Michelle Ward, you own me. Completely. Irrevocably. I am yours in a way I have never been anyone's, and I do not know how to pretend otherwise anymore. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, because words seemed inadequate for what she was feeling. His hands were everywhere, learning her body through her professional armor, and she felt herself unraveling in his arms. The elevator hung suspended between floors, frozen in time and space, a private world where nothing existed except the two of them. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, her lipstick was smeared and his hair was thoroughly destroyed. You have a meeting, she reminded him, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. I hate meetings. You love meetings. You live for the conquest. I used to. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Now I just count the minutes until I can see you again. He hit the emergency button. The elevator shuddered back to life, descending toward the lobby. By the time the doors opened, they had reconstructed themselves, professional masks firmly in place. But as he stepped out, he paused and looked back at her. Have dinner with me tomorrow, not a work dinner, a real dinner. Somewhere quiet where I can look at you without worrying about who is watching. Is that an order, Mr. Rivers? It is a plea, Miss Ward. He smiled. Actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Please. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. The smile widened. And then he was gone, striding through the lobby like a man who owned the world, which, in many ways, he did. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of public professionalism and private passion. They had dinner at quiet restaurants in neighborhoods where no one would recognize them. They stole moments in his office after hours, kisses that escalated into more against his desk, his couch, against the windows in his office. Michelle learned the private language of his body, the way his jaw tightened when he was frustrated, the way his hands trembled when he touched her skin. She learned that he hummed off key in the shower and that he was secretly addicted to terrible reality television. She learned that beneath all that ice, there was a man so starved for warmth that he drank in her affection like sunlight. And Noel learned her too. He learned that she cried at commercials and laughed at his terrible jokes. He learned that she stressed about things she could not control and relaxed only when she was in his arms. He learned that she had spent her whole life being strong, being perfect, being everything everyone needed her to be, and he made it his mission to give her space to be vulnerable. But they were also colleagues, collaborators, and sometimes the lines blurred in ways that neither of them could control. It happened during a client meeting, 3 weeks after their return from Switzerland. The client was a venture capitalist named Hearℹ Webb, handsome in a calculated way, with a smile that lingered too long on Michelle when she entered the room. Noel noticed immediately. His entire body stiffened beside her, his professional mask hardening into something colder, sharper. Throughout the meeting, Webb directed his questions to Michelle, complimented her insights, leaned in too close when she spoke. And Noel sat there, ice cold, watching every interaction with eyes that promised violence. The meeting ended without incident, but the aftermath was explosive. In my office, Noel said as soon as Webb left. His voice was calm, controlled, but Michelle recognized the fury simmering beneath the surface. She followed him, closing the door behind her. If this is about Webb, he was staring at you, like you were something to be purchased. He was looking at me. There is a difference. Not from where I was sitting. He paced to his desk, then back again, his movements sharp with barely contained energy. The way he leaned in when you talked, the way his eyes tracked you around the room. Does he not know that you are that? I am what? She crossed her arms, matching his intensity with her own. Your property? Your possession? Because last time I checked, you have not exactly made any public declarations about what we are. And whose fault is that? You were the one who wanted to keep this quiet, to protect your reputation. My reputation is all I have in this world, Noel. I am a black woman in an industry dominated by white men. If word gets out that I am sleeping with my boss, do you have any idea what people will say? What they will assume about how I got this position? Let them assume. Let them say whatever they want. I will destroy anyone who questions your competence. You cannot destroy everyone. Her voice cracked slightly, and she saw him flinch at the sound. You cannot protect me from the world. Then you have absolutely no idea who I am. He was across the room in 3 strides, his hands framing her face as he backed her against his mahogany desk. Papers scattered to the floor, but neither of them noticed. His eyes burned into hers, blue fire against brown, and his voice dropped to something raw and desperate. Do you think I do not know what you risk by being with me? Every day, you walk into this building and put your career on the line just by loving me. You could have anyone, Michelle, anyone in the world. Men who would not complicate your life, who would not put you in impossible positions, who would not make you choose between your ambition and your heart. And yet you stay. You choose me, and I do not know what I did to deserve that, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. Michelle's anger dissolved like morning frost. She reached up, touched his face, felt the tension vibrating through him. You are impossible, she said softly. I know. I do not stay because I have no other options. I stay because I want to. Because when I wake up next to you, I feel like I am finally home. Because you see me, all of me, the ambition and the fear and the exhaustion, and you love me anyway. I do love you. The words fell from his lips like he could not hold them back anymore. I love you so much, it terrifies me. I love you so much that watching another man look at you makes me want to commit felonies. I love you so much that I have rewritten my will 3 times in the past month because I keep wanting to give you more. You rewrote your will? Twice yesterday. My lawyer thinks I'm losing my mind. He pressed his forehead to hers. I probably am. You have driven me completely insane, Michelle Ward, and I have never been happier. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and felt him melt against her. But the sweetness did not last. It never did. With them, the kiss deepened, hunger rising, and suddenly his hands were at her waist, lifting her onto the edge of his desk. We are in your office, she breathed. I know. Anyone could walk in. The door is locked. His lips traced down her neck. I locked it when we came in. Just in case. Just in case of what? In case I needed to do this. He pushed her further back on the desk, sending a cascade of papers to the floor. And this. His hands found the zipper of her skirt. And definitely this. The office faded away. The city outside the windows blurred into nothing. There was only him, his mouth on her skin, his hands learning her body like sacred text. He whispered her name between kisses, told her she was beautiful, brilliant, perfect, and she let herself believe it, let herself drown in his devotion, because in this moment, in this stolen space between professionalism and passion, she could be just a woman in love with a man who worshipped her. I should fire you, he murmured against her throat. What? So we could be together properly. So I could take you to dinner without hiding. So I could tell the whole damn world that you are mine. I am not quitting my job so you can feel better about your jealousy issues. He laughed. Actually laughed, the sound vibrating against her skin. I know. That is one of the reasons I love you. You never let me get away with anything. Someone has to keep you humble. You do." He pulled back to look at her, his expression soft in a way that still surprised her. "You make me want to be better. Not just richer or more powerful, but actually better. A man worthy of the way you look at me. You are worthy. I am trying to be." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "For you. Always for you." They stayed tangled together for a long time, exchanging lazy kisses and whispered confessions. Eventually, reluctantly, they had to separate. There were meetings to attend, contracts to review, an empire to run. But as Michelle gathered the scattered papers and Noel straightened his tie, something had shifted between them once again. They were no longer just hiding. They were no longer just surviving the impossible situation they had created. They were building something, brick by brick, a foundation that could maybe, possibly, support the weight of everything they were becoming. "Dinner tonight?" he asked as she headed for the door. "I have to work late. Then I will work late with you. Order Chinese and pretend to review contracts while really just watching you." "That sounds counterproductive." "It sounds perfect." He caught her hand as she passed, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Everything is perfect when you are there. Even the terrible parts." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "You are insufferable, and yet you stay." "And yet I stay." The door closed behind her, and Michelle allowed herself one moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. It could not last. She knew that. The walls were closing in, the secrets growing harder to keep, the risks multiplying with every stolen moment. But for now, in this brief suspended space between crisis and catastrophe, she let herself believe that love might be enough. The morning started like any other, with coffee at exactly 175 degrees and a stack of documents waiting on Noel's desk. Michelle moved through her routine with the practiced efficiency of 3 years, adjusting his schedule, fielding calls, pretending that everything was normal while her body still hummed from the night before. They had stayed late again, tangled together on the couch in his office, trading kisses and confessions until the city lights began to dim. He had told her about the house he wanted to buy upstate, somewhere with trees and quiet, somewhere they could escape when the weight of the empire became too heavy. She had laughed and called him a secret romantic, and he had kissed her until she stopped laughing and started gasping instead. Now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of morning, those whispered dreams felt impossibly fragile. The first sign that something was wrong came at 9:15, when Noel's phone began ringing incessantly. Not his business line, which Michelle controlled, but his personal cell, the one that only a handful of people had access to. She watched through the glass wall of his office as he answered, his expression shifting from confusion to something she had never seen before. Fear. Noel Rivers, the Ice King, looked afraid. He hung up and immediately called her in. When she entered his office, he was already at his computer, his face pale as he stared at the screen. "Close the door," he said. His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fractures beneath the surface. She closed it. "What is wrong?" He turned the monitor toward her without a word. The headline hit her like a physical blow. Billionaire CEO caught in secret affair with assistant. Below it, a grainy photograph that made her stomach drop through the floor. The Swiss hotel hallway. Noel pressing her against the wall outside their room, his mouth on her neck, his hands tangled in her hair. The image was blurry but unmistakable, clearly taken from a security camera and leaked by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "When did this come out?" Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "An hour ago." "It is already everywhere." Michelle sank into the chair across from his desk, her legs no longer capable of holding her weight. Everything she had worked for, every barrier she had overcome, every late night and early morning and perfect performance, all of it crumbling because of a single photograph. Who leaked it? Harrison Webb. The rival tech firm he represents has been trying to destabilize us for months. This was their nuclear option. Noel's hands were shaking. She had never seen them shake before. "Michelle, I am so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have. We should have." She cut him off, her mind already racing through the implications. "We both knew the risks. The board is calling an emergency meeting in an hour." He stood, pacing to the window, his reflection ghostly against the Manhattan skyline. Morrison has already been on the phone to 3 other members. They smell blood. What are they going to do? He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. They want a scapegoat, someone to blame so the stock prices do not tank, someone to sacrifice to the court of public opinion. The cold realization crept through her. They want me. They want one of us. He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her breath catch. The narrative is already being spun. Either I coerced you, which makes me a predator, or you seduced me, which makes you an opportunist. Either way, one of us has to take the fall. Then let it be me. Your company. Do not finish that sentence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees in front of her chair and taking her hands in his. "Do you honestly think I would let them destroy you to save my reputation? Do you think there is any version of this where I sacrifice you? Noel, listen to me." His grip tightened, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that frightened her. "I have built empires and torn them down. I have made and lost fortunes. None of it means anything, Michelle. None of it matters. You are the only thing in my life that has ever felt real, and I will burn this entire company to the ground before I let them take you from me." Tears pricked at her eyes. "That is not a solution. That is martyrdom. Then we will figure out another way." He pressed his forehead to their joined hands. "Together, the way we do everything." But even as he said it, she could hear the doubt in his voice, because they both knew how this story ended. They had known from the beginning, had simply chosen to ignore it. In a world where power was everything, and image was power, there was no happy ending for a billionaire and his assistant. Not one that left both of them intact. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. At 9:45, Noel kissed her in his office, a desperate, clinging kiss that tasted like goodbye. "Whatever happens in that room," he said, "remember that I love you. Remember that everything I do because I cannot imagine a world without you in it. You are scaring me." He touched her face one last time, his fingers trembling against her skin. "Wait for me. Please. Just wait for me. And trust that I am going to fix this." He left for the boardroom without looking back. If he had, she might have seen the way her expression crumbled. She might have known that her trust was already fracturing under the weight of what was coming. The board meeting lasted 2 hours. Michelle spent them at her desk, fielding calls from reporters, lawyers, and concerned executives. She told them all the same thing. "No comment. Please direct inquiries to the legal department. Mr. Rivers will issue a statement when appropriate." Inside, she was falling apart. When Noel finally emerged from the conference room, his face was a mask of ice. The warm man who had knelt before her that morning was gone, replaced by the cold CEO who made grown men weep in negotiations. He walked past her desk without acknowledgement, entered his office, and closed the door. 5 minutes later, his assistant line buzzed. "Miss Ward." "In my office, please." Miss Ward. Not Michelle. The distance in those 2 words made her blood run cold. She entered to find him behind his desk, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He did not ask her to sit. He did not look at her with any of the warmth she had come to rely on. He looked at her like she was a stranger. "The board has made their position clear," he said, his voice flat. "In order to protect the company and its shareholders, we need to present a unified response to this scandal." "And what response is that?" "You will be terminated effective immediately. A generous severance package has been prepared, enough to ensure your financial security for the foreseeable future. In exchange, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement and refrain from any public comment about our relationship." The word hit her like a slap. Relationship. Reduced to a single clinical term, spoken without emotion. "You are firing me. I am protecting the company. You are firing me." She repeated it, needing to hear the words, needing to make them real. After everything. After Switzerland. After all those pretty words about burning the company down, you are choosing them over me. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or regret. But his voice remained steady. "This was a mistake, Michelle, a lapse in judgment on both our parts. We allowed personal feelings to interfere with professional responsibilities, and now we are facing the consequences. A mistake." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "That is what you are calling it, a mistake. What would you call it?" She stared at him, searching for any crack in the armor, any sign that the man she loved was still in there somewhere. But his face was stone, his eyes ice, and she realized with devastating clarity that she had been a fool to believe anything else. "I would call it the worst decision I ever made," she said quietly. "Trusting you." The words landed. She saw it in the slight tightening of his jaw, the barely perceptible flinch. But he did not break. He did not reach for her. He simply sat behind his massive desk and let her walk out of his life. She gathered her things in a daze. 3 years of her life condensed into a single cardboard box. The photograph of her mother that she kept on her desk. The coffee mug she had bought during a rare lunch break. The small succulent she had nursed back to health after someone left it dying in the break room. The other employees watched her go, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for her fall from grace. Relief that it was not them. In the elevator, she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of breakdown, 30 seconds of silent tears, of shoulders shaking, of grief too large to contain. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and walked out of Rivers Industries with her head held high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The apartment felt smaller than she remembered. Michelle stood in her living room, surrounded by moving boxes she had not yet unpacked from her last move, and tried to figure out what came next. Job applications. She should start there. Update her resume, reach out to contacts, leverage the experience she had gained over 3 years of managing an impossible man and his impossible company. She was good at what she did. She would find another position. She would rebuild. But every time she sat down at her laptop, her fingers froze over the keyboard. How could she summarize 3 years without mentioning the man who had consumed every part of them? How could she explain her sudden departure without revealing the scandal that had caused it? 3 days passed in a haze of sleeplessness and delivered takeout. She ignored calls from her mother, from former colleagues, from the stream of reporters still trying to get a comment. She watched the news coverage with morbid fascination, seeing her own face plastered across gossip sites, her name dissected by strangers who had never met her. Michelle Ward, gold digger or victim. The billionaire's secret, how one assistant brought down an empire. Rivers Industries stock plunges as CEO scandal deepens. She turned off her phone and pulled the blinds. On the 4th day, she started packing. There was nothing left for her in New York. Her career was in tatters, her reputation destroyed, her heart shattered into pieces too small to ever reassemble. She would go home to Miami, regroup, figure out who she was when she was not Michelle Ward, executive assistant to the most powerful man in the city. She was taping up the last box of books when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against her door, confident and commanding. She froze, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs, because she knew that knock. She had heard it 100 times, on office doors and hotel rooms, and the walls of her own defenses. She opened the door. Noel stood in the hallway, looking nothing like the man she had left 4 days ago. His suit was rumpled, his tie missing entirely. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a wildness in his expression that she had never seen before. He looked wrecked. Desperate, human. Do not close the door, he said quickly before she could react. Please. I know you have every right to slam it in my face, but I need you to hear me first. Just hear me. And then if you want me to leave, I will go. I swear I will go, and never bother you again. Michelle stood frozen, her hand on the doorframe, every instinct screaming at her to shut him out. He had hurt her, humiliated her, reduced everything they had shared to a mistake and sent her away like she was nothing. But there was something in his eyes that stopped her, something broken and terrified that looked exactly like the way she felt. 5 minutes, she said, that is all you get. He nodded and stepped inside, looking around at the boxes, the bare walls, the evidence of her imminent departure. Something in his expression cracked. You are leaving. There is nothing for me here. Michelle, he stopped, swallowing hard. I need to tell you what really happened in that board meeting. What they said, what they threatened, why I did what I did. You fired me. You called our relationship a mistake. What more is there to say? Everything. He moved toward her, then stopped when she took a step back, his hands clenched at his sides. The board gave me an ultimatum. They wanted me to throw you to the wolves, to tell the press that you had seduced me, manipulated your way into my bed to advance your career. They had talking points prepared, a whole narrative designed to destroy your reputation and save mine. And you said no. I said no. So they gave me another option. His voice was raw, scraped hollow. Fire you quietly, give you a severance that would ensure you never had to work again, and spin the story as a mutual mistake that we were both moving past. They said it was the only way to save you from complete destruction. Michelle felt the ground shift beneath her feet. So you were trying to protect me? I was terrified. He took another step toward her, and this time she did not retreat. They had lawyers and PR specialists and a whole playbook for ruining people. They said if I did not cooperate, they would leak your employment records, fabricate performance issues, plant stories about previous relationships with superiors. They were going to paint you as a serial seductress who targeted powerful men. Why did you not tell me? Because you would have fought them. You would have stood your ground and demanded the truth, and they would have crucified you for it. His voice broke. I could not watch that happen, Michelle. I could not let them tear you apart in public just because you made the mistake of loving me. She sank onto the arm of her couch, her legs no longer reliable. So, everything in your office, the coldness, calling it a mistake, a performance, the worst one of my life. He knelt before her, just like he had that morning in his office, taking her hands in his. I have been dying since you walked out. I have not slept. I have not eaten. I have done nothing but sit in my apartment and watch the news coverage and hate myself for hurting you. What about the company? The board? A strange smile crossed his face. I quit. You what? I told them to go to hell. Yesterday. Walked into Morrison's office and handed him my resignation. His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. They wanted to schedule a transition meeting, and I told them they could transition themselves straight to oblivion. I may have also threatened to liquidate my shares in a way that would tank the stock price, but that is neither here nor there. Michelle stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You quit your own company, the company you built. It was never the company that mattered. He released her hands and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. I brought you something. A speech I was going to give at the press conference tomorrow, before I tell the whole world exactly what the board tried to do and exactly why they can rot. She took the paper with trembling fingers and unfolded it. His handwriting covered the page, crossed out and rewritten in places, a draft of something raw and unpolished. I fell in love with Michelle Ward 3 years ago on her first day of work when she walked into my office and told me I was wrong about a spreadsheet. I had hired dozens of assistants before her, and not one of them had ever dared to correct me. She did it without hesitation, without apology, and I knew in that moment that she was going to change everything. She made me better. She made me human. She made me believe that maybe, despite everything I had done and everything I had become, I was capable of being loved. The board of Rivers Industries attempted to destroy her to protect their stock prices. I will not allow that. I will not stand by while the woman I love is sacrificed on the altar of corporate greed. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO. I am divesting my controlling interest. And I am walking away from everything I built because none of it matters, not a single dollar or stock option or corner office, without her. Michelle looked up from the paper, tears streaming down her face. Noel was watching her with an expression of raw vulnerability, his masks completely stripped away. "I do not want you to leave," he said quietly. "I do not want to spend another night without you. But more than that, I need you to know that you did not make a mistake. Loving me was not a mistake. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you, if you let me." She could not speak. The words were trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat, tangled up in 3 years of tension and 4 days of heartbreak, and this impossible, terrifying hope that was blooming in her chest. So she did the only thing she could do. She pulled him to his feet, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him. He melted into her like a man finally coming home after years of wandering. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her close, and she felt his whole body shudder with relief. He kissed her like she was oxygen, like she was salvation, like she was every good thing he had ever been denied. "I am so sorry," he breathed against her lips. "I am so sorry for the things I said. I did not mean any of it. You are not a mistake. You could never be a mistake." "I know." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I was so angry. I hated you for those 4 days. You had every right. I still love you. I do not deserve that." "Probably not." She pulled back just enough to see his face. "But I am giving it to you anyway. That is what love is, right? Giving people more than they deserve?" He laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from watching you make terrible decisions." His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I want to do this right. No more hiding, no more secrets. I want to take you to dinner at restaurants where everyone can see us. I want to hold your hand in public. I want to introduce you to my sister and beg you to forgive her for being as emotionally stunted as I am." "You have a sister?" "I mentioned her on the plane. We have not spoken in years, but I called her yesterday. After I quit, I told her about you, and she said she could not wait to meet the woman who finally melted the Ice King." Michelle felt a fresh wave of tears threaten. "You are really doing this? Giving it all up? I am really doing this." He pressed his forehead to hers. "The money will still be there. I am not walking away from my fortune, just my position. We will be fine. We will be more than fine. And for the first time in my life, I will be free. Free to do what? Whatever we want." His smile was genuine, unguarded, the smile she had only ever seen in private. "Travel. Sleep in. Adopt a dog. Buy that house upstate with the trees and the quiet. Learn how to cook something other than disaster." "You want to learn to cook?" "I want to learn everything. With you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "I want a whole life, Michelle. A real one. And I want it with you." She pulled him toward the bedroom. Not with urgency this time, but with intention, a declaration. "Then let us start now." They made love slowly that night, in her small bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes. No desperate hunger, no stolen moments. Just two people finally able to take their time, to explore each other, without the clock ticking down to the next meeting, the next crisis, the next interruption. He worshipped her body with his hands and his mouth, whispering words of devotion against her skin. "You are so beautiful. I have dreamed about this. I will never get tired of touching you." She arched into him, gasping his name, and he answered with hers, over and over, like a vow. When they finally joined, it felt different. Complete. Like the last piece of a puzzle, clicking into place after years of searching. He moved inside her with a tenderness that made her weep, his eyes never leaving hers, his hands tangled in her hair. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I love you so much I gave up everything, and it still does not feel like enough." "It is enough." She pulled him closer, deeper. "You are enough." They shattered together, waves of pleasure cresting and breaking, their bodies synchronized in a rhythm that felt ancient and inevitable. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets, his head on her chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his back. "I unpacked the boxes in my head," she murmured, "while you were talking. I was mentally putting everything back. Does that mean you are staying?" "It means I am not running away." She tilted his face up to look at her. "But we need to figure out what comes next. Together." "Together," he agreed. "I like that word. You use it a lot." "Because I spent 38 years doing everything alone." He pressed a kiss to her collarbone. "I am making up for lost time." They fell asleep as the city lights dimmed outside her window, wrapped around each other like they were afraid to let go. And for the first time in weeks, Michelle dreamed of something other than loss. She dreamed of mountains and snow and a chapel in the Alps, and a man with blue eyes who looked at her like she was the first warm thing he had ever touched. 6 months later, they returned to Switzerland. The private jet touched down on a morning so clear that the mountains looked like they had been painted against the sky. Michelle pressed her face to the window like a child, watching the snow-capped peaks grow larger as they descended. "I cannot believe we are back here," she said. Beside her, Noel squeezed her hand. "I wanted to replace the memories, give us something better to associate with this place. The memories were not all bad. The blizzard was terrifying. The hotel mix-up was a disaster, and I spent the entire trip convinced I was going to destroy both our lives. And yet here we are." The car took them to a different hotel this time, a small chalet on the edge of the village, all warm wood and crackling fireplaces. Their suite had a view of the mountains that stole her breath, and a bed large enough that they did not need to build any fortresses. Not that they would have anyway. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the peaks, Noel led her outside to a small garden covered in fresh snow. String lights twinkled in the bare branches overhead, and a path of lanterns wound through the white landscape like a trail of stars. "What is this?" Michelle asked, her breath misting in the cold air. "This is me," making a grand gesture. He stopped in the center of the garden, beneath an arch of frozen flowers that sparkled with ice crystals. "I am told I am supposed to be good at those. You are better at intimidating people in boardrooms." "That is fair." He reached into his coat pocket, and Michelle's heart stopped. "I had this made 6 months ago, the day after I quit. I walked into a jewelry store and demanded they create something worthy of you, and the poor salesperson nearly had a nervous breakdown." He pulled out a small velvet box. "Noel, let me finish, please." He took a deep breath. "I spent my whole life building things. Companies, fortunes, walls around my heart. I was so good at construction that I forgot how to feel. And then you walked into my office with your perfect posture and your sharper mind, and you started tearing everything down." He opened the box. Inside, nestled against black velvet, was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in a band of white gold that caught the fading light and scattered it like stars. "I chose a sapphire because it reminds me of the way you looked at me that first morning in Switzerland. Like you could see straight through all my walls." He sank to one knee in the snow. "Michelle Ward, you are the most brilliant, beautiful, terrifying person I have ever known. You made me want to be better. You made me believe I could be, and I cannot imagine spending another day of my life without you beside me." Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "You are proposing in Switzerland, where everything started." I wanted to bring it full circle. He looked up at her with those blue eyes, completely unguarded. "Marry me. Not because I am rich or powerful or any of the things I used to think mattered. Marry me because I love you more than I have ever loved anything, and because you make me feel like I am finally home." She did not hesitate. Yes, she pulled him to his feet and kissed him, tasting salt and cold and joy. Yes, yes, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. He had probably measured her hand while she slept. "I also arranged something else," he said, his smile turning mischievous. "If you are interested." "What kind of something else?" "The small chapel at the top of the hill, the one with the view of the entire valley." He nodded toward the lights twinkling in the distance. "I may have reserved it for tomorrow." Michelle stared at him. "Tomorrow?" "My sister is here. She arrived yesterday. She has been waiting at the chalet, probably drinking all our champagne." He touched her face, brushing a snowflake from her eyelash. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait, do the whole traditional thing with the big wedding and the guest list and the months of planning. But I do not want to wait anymore. I have waited 3 years to love you openly. I do not want to wait another day to make it official." "You want to get married tomorrow?" "I want to get married today if I could arrange it." His eyes softened. "But tomorrow, in the chapel, just us and my sister and the mountains. If you want." She thought about her mother in Miami, about the friends she had made over the years, about all the people who would be hurt if she got married without them. She thought about tradition and expectation and the way things were supposed to be done. And then she thought about the man in front of her, who had given up an empire for her, who was looking at her like she was the center of his universe. "Tomorrow," she said, "tomorrow is perfect." The chapel was small and ancient, its stone walls holding centuries of prayers. Snow blanketed the ground outside, and through the windows the entire valley spread out like a painting, white and blue, and impossibly beautiful. Michelle wore a simple dress of ivory silk, found at a small boutique in the village that morning. Her hair was loose, the way Noel liked it, and the only jewelry she wore was the sapphire ring that had not left her finger since he put it there. Noel stood at the altar in a dark suit, his sister beside him dabbing at tears she kept insisting were allergies. He watched Michelle walk toward him with an expression that made her heart ache, wonder and disbelief and overwhelming love all tangled together. The ceremony was brief. A few words from the officiant, vows they had written themselves, rings exchanged with trembling fingers. And then it was done, and they were married. And Noel was kissing her like the world was ending and beginning all at once. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Wife, wife." She tested the word, feeling its weight. "That is going to take some getting used to. We have the rest of our lives to practice." That night, in their suite at the chalet, they made love with a new reverence. Husband and wife, partners. The words transformed everything, made each touch feel sacred, each kiss a covenant. "I still cannot believe you planned all of this," Michelle said afterward, lying across his chest while the fire crackled in the corner. "The garden, the chapel, the ring. When did you even find time?" "I had 6 months of not running a company. I had to fill the hours somehow." "So you planned our wedding?" "I planned every possible version of our wedding. This was the one I wanted most." He pressed a kiss to her hair, small, intimate, just us against the world. "Your sister was crying through the whole ceremony. She is going to deny it forever. We rivers do not cry." But his own eyes were suspiciously bright as he said it. Michelle traced the lines of his face, memorizing him in the firelight. "Tell me something. Something you have never told anyone." "I already told you about hating the cold. Tell me something else." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, "I used to dream about this, before you, before I ever thought someone like you could exist." I used to lie awake at night and imagine what it would feel like to love someone and have them love me back, to not be alone anymore. And does the reality live up to the dream? The reality is so far beyond the dream that they are not even comparable. He rolled her beneath him, bracing himself on his elbows, looking down at her with naked adoration. You are so far beyond anything I ever dared to hope for, Michelle Rivers. I still cannot believe you are real. Rivers. She smiled. He kissed her again. And the conversation dissolved into something more immediate, more urgent. They had the rest of their lives for talking. Right now, there were better uses for their mouths. Later, much later, as they lay tangled together watching the snow fall outside their window, Noel spoke again. I want to take you everywhere. Paris, Tokyo, the Maldives, all the places I have traveled for business but never actually seen. I want to see them properly. With you. That sounds expensive. Good thing I am still disgustingly wealthy. She laughed, and he pulled her closer, pressing his smile against her neck. I love that sound, he murmured. I want to spend every day finding new ways to make you laugh. That is an ambitious goal. I am an ambitious man. His hand traced down her side. Speaking of ambition, I was thinking about our next trip. Already? We should check into the Grand Palace on the way home. Just for one night. His eyes sparkled with mischief. For nostalgia. The hotel with the blizzard and the single room. The very same. Michelle considered this. You know they will probably have plenty of rooms available this time. I am sure they will. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. But just to be safe, I called ahead. Requested the same suite. Told them under no circumstances were they to offer us anything else. She laughed again, a bright burst of joy that filled the room. You are insane. For you, he pulled her closer. Always for you. The next morning, they checked out of the chalet and began the drive to Zurich. The Grand Palace welcomed them back with considerably less chaos than their first visit, and the concierge, a different one than before, greeted them with professional warmth. Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, your suite is ready. Is there anything else you require? Noel looked at Michelle, his eyes dancing with memories of blizzards and pillow fortresses, and 3 years of waiting finally ended. Actually, he said, turning back to the concierge with a smile that transformed his entire face, just make sure there is only one bed. Michelle laughed, and Noel kissed her right there in the lobby, in front of the staff and the guests and anyone else who happened to be watching. Because they did not have to hide anymore. They did not have to pretend. They were home. They were together. And that was all that mattered. The elevator doors closed behind them, and as they rose to their suite, Michelle leaned into her husband's embrace and thought about how far they had come. From the frozen offices of Rivers Industries to this moment, wrapped in each other's arms, legally and irrevocably bound. Worth it? Noel asked, reading her expression. She did not have to ask what he meant. Every moment, she said, even the terrible ones. He kissed her as the elevator doors opened, and she kissed him back, and somewhere outside the mountains stood witness to a love story that had started with a spreadsheet correction and ended with a chapel in the snow. And now, dear listener, we reach the end of our journey with Michelle and Noel. But before we part ways, I want to hear from you. What moment made your heart race the fastest? Drop your answers in the comments. Share your favorite lines, your favorite scenes, the moments that made you catch your breath. I'll see you in my next story. Lots of love.